Just waiting for that to say live. And the counter is going. And with that, what is going on? Welcome to Joe's Geek Show, the video series where we talk comics. And today we've got a very, very interesting conversation going on with, do people understand Superman? And helping me with that is my good buddy, DarkKnightNation. How you doing, sir?
What's going on, man? I'm doing good. You know, like we said prior to opening up the recording, man, I'm feeling pretty hot on Superman off of my last episode of Let's Talk Comics. So I'm feeling ready, and I'm grateful for you inviting me on, my friend.
Yeah, not a problem, not a problem. And I do want to say, you know, I watched that stream that you did. That was an awesome conversation that you, Comic Boom, and Geek Fortress had. And hey, if you haven't been to his channel and checked that out yet, I do highly recommend it. I believe I left a link for his channel in the description down below. And if I forgot to, I will definitely plug it in after this video has wrapped up. And I am pretty much ready to go myself. I got a nice fruit punch flavored energy drink that I'm now going to crack because
Coffee.
Hashtag caffeine. It's the only way to go.
Dude, every season is coffee season. So I'm here. I got you.
Amen to that. Amen to that. So, yes, the Man of Steel himself, Superman. So ultimately, the entire basis for me wanting to have this conversation came from a few different things. Like I'd say over the course of the last few months and stuff like that, from, WB, like some WB producer or executive saying that they're not sure how to make Superman like relevant or relatable to these times, with even Neil Gaiman coming in saying, you don't make them, relatable, you make them inspiring and stuff like that. And even just basic conversations that I have with other people where, you just go in and you have people saying that, they don't like Superman because he's too OP and this and that, and just really basing and taking a look at Superman from a very superficial perspective. And I just wanted to kind of dig into it, these, what people are talking about, just to kind of sort of really look at Superman from all these various angles, because I personally feel like saying that not liking Superman because he's too OP is doing a great disservice to the character as a whole, because you're not taking a look close enough at what really makes Superman Superman. So just to kind of kick things off, how do you feel about like all these claims and things going on with the character?
Well, I mean, there's something worth noting in that it is really easy, and it's been done a lot, for creatives both in like the film space and in the comic book space to totally butcher Superman. Like, Superman is not necessarily an easy character to execute.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't help that, at one point Superman was probably the most well-known icon in the world. And I think that the argument could still be made for that today. But, he's a difficult character, I think, to not only write well, but just to exhibit the appeal of, right? So I definitely think that's worth mentioning. Also, big hi to my pal Geek Fortress. Superman is awesome. Yep. And yeah, he was the Geek Fortress here was a big part of my conversation the other day. But the thing about Superman is that, the character rests on morals and ideals that I think you don't often see reflected in other spaces, even in the real world. So a lot of people tend to think of him as this, unachievable thing that people can't relate to. And like you'd said, regarding Neil Gaiman's quote, is that he doesn't necessarily need to be relatable. Superman is meant to represent the best of us. And in many ways, that we can't fully ever achieve, right? It's almost this this pedestal, to which we should be climbing as individuals, as a society, and as a human race. Even though we know we'll never quite achieve it, we must keep climbing towards it. And I would say late 80s, early 90s, and so on, people started looking for characters that were darker, flawed, fallible, more easy to relate to. And I think that's why you're seeing a lot of, even heroes in stories, whether it be comics or not, be kind of repulsive at times. You know, they're
Mhm.
flawed. And, you know, our understanding of interesting characters and what makes them interesting has changed. And it's reflected in the times that we live in and in the times that we've passed by, right? So people tend to kind of demarcate Superman as something that is outdated. And I think that in the fact that most modern day heroes are not reflected the same way Superman is, that's kind of what makes Superman more interesting now than ever. So I think that not only do generally fans kind of have this superficial understanding of why the character is special, but even so too does the studio, right? And I would
Mhm.
go as far as saying even DC Comics itself right now is dropping the ball, improving their understanding of their own character.
Yeah, that is a very, very good point. And and then you mentioned, there seems to be, and it's quite easy to excuse me, Speedy.
Hmm.
It's quite easy that to note that there is definitely, especially nowadays, seemingly a lack of understanding of who Superman is as a character. Even when you look at, not even Superman himself, but how archetypes are generally represented in media today. Like even as kids in kids films, you have movies like Megamind, for example, I think, where you have a character in there that is very much a Superman archetype, where he is the world's greatest hero and stuff like that. But then what happens? What do we find out about him? That he's quite narcissistic, that that even though he has a care for the people, he would, at the end of the day, rather go live underground than keep the people safe. And then, that also with the character Megamind, even that, intellect is sometimes better than the brawn, as if to, in a way say that, this character, this Superman type character isn't necessarily the best way to go, that he's not, the cream of the crop that he was made up to be. And I think through that, people can sometimes look at characters like that and often even relate those again to Superman, since they are so close to that character, and think to themselves, maybe there is a connection there. Maybe they are trying to say that Superman, again, just isn't all that in a bag of chips, as you would say. And again, like I said, you just go through, certain movies, kids movies and whatnot, where you see a lot of these Superman archetypes. And, like I said, the representation of those characters sometimes, even if not on purpose, does, can change the perspective of how we see, the originating character as a whole.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a big part of it too that's reflected in a live chat here from Jace. And it's something that I really, really stressed in my conversation with Comic Boom and the Geek Fortress the other night. And again, it's reflected in Jace's live chat here. In that Superman's the best part about Superman isn't his superpowers, right? Like his actual superpower isn't his ability to, punch somebody through a mountain or to melt steel beams, with heat vision. It's his restraint, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's his measurable humanity that you can find in how he handles himself, whether or not, it's in a sort of combat situation or it's in a rescue situation or whatever. That level of restraint and care that he provides to pretty much every situation that involves him is really what makes him special, because it would be all too easy for Superman to become a tyrant and to impose his will on the people of Earth, right? We've seen it in kind of other doomsday scenarios like Injustice. And you could also be in a situation where, and this is where you kind of find that balance, right? Because you could also have the opposite, where Superman just doesn't give a shit about the human race. He flies off to Mars or the moon, pulls a Dr. Manhattan. And both are equally plausible. So not only do you have to kind of admire the restraint that he shows, but you have to admire the amount of care that he shows as well, right? The tireless effort that Superman makes to better humanity, right? And there's a quote, and I feel bad, or I'm going to be paraphrasing it, and I also don't exactly remember who put it out into the, you know, into the world, but they had said that Superman doesn't exist to help carry humanity up the ladder. Superman is there to catch you when you fall off the ladder and to put you back on it, right? To give you that chance, that stepping stone to put yourself in the place where you need or want to be. And that is, I think, one of the most measurably great things about the character. And it's, you know, I'm not original for saying this. For an alien, Superman is the most human of us all, and that's a big part of what makes him so special. You know, and I, as a diehard Batman fan, as I get older, the more I acknowledge how important Superman is. Right, not only because of that sort of spectacular balance that those two characters represent in their dichotomy, but for what Superman represents to the DC universe, and even extrapolating that beyond into our world, right? What that symbolism means. So it's frustrating, you know, when you go online, and we've talked about this multiple times, including prior to us filming here, that it's not pleasant when you go into, you know, comic book community fan circles on the internet, and when you bring up Superman, the first question is, can Superman beat this? Can Superman beat that? You know, Superman versus gonorrhea from, you know, the X-Men number 257. Like, does it matter? Like, is that really the most important thing, or the most immediate thing that comes to mind when you look at this symbol of humanitarianism, right? This near omnipotent God who chooses to use his abilities to dedicate his mental space towards saving humanity. I mean, and it's frustrating. Honestly, it is really, really frustrating. And I get it. Like, when I first got into comics when I was 15, 16, I was that guy that was like, F Superman, Batman would kick his ass any day. And I didn't see it. Right. And then I think somewhere around 18, I started understanding why Superman is so endearing, why he is so special. And it's frankly a little bit frustrating when you see grown adults just not putting two and two together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I am right there with you on the frustration level, you know, because it does get tiresome and it does get boring really fast just to bring up Superman. And can Superman, like you said, beat this, or that, you know? And again, it's like, you know, putting Superman and just looking at him based on his power is not really giving the character his due credit. And you have to think how difficult it is for him to navigate the world. There are stories out there where we see things like this. You know, it was even in, like you said, not even in comics, but sometimes in film, like in the Justice League Unlimited animated series within the finale, where Superman tells Darkseid that, you know, for him, it's like he lives in a world where that constantly feels like he could break it at any moment, right? It feels like paper to him. So you got to think, you know, if a world that feels like paper, every time he, you know, shakes a hand, every time he opens a door, he has to do it with the utmost precision and care. And I feel like one of the best examples to ever illustrate just how in control he has to be at all times is the storyline in Batman Superman back from 2008. I don't know if you read this one, where Batman actually through I believe it was Silver Banshee, gets Superman's powers. And over the course of the story, we see Batman, like, he's using the powers. He essentially goes on more or less like a world police kind of thing, where he even begins to sort of get drunk with power. And it's really through that it's illustrated just how, you know, how it is for Superman on a daily basis, because, you know, over the course of the story, Batman comes to understand the responsibility that comes with these powers, you know, and it's really like that transformation of his way of thinking of, if I had your powers, you know, things would be a lot different than they are. But then after getting his powers, it's a complete change in perspective for Batman, as he, you know, comes to understand, just like I said, the amount of responsibility it comes with these abilities. And I think, you know, that was, you know, that storyline in itself is one of the best, just one of the best indicators of what it's like for Superman, from the day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And Jace said something else in the chat about how, restraint is so ingrained in what makes Superman special, and that he feels like Superman doesn't really have to exert himself. Here's where I slightly disagree with that, man. I think that Superman actually does have to exert himself to keep that restraint, and I think that's part of what makes Superman so special, is that he is constantly not allowing himself to go on autopilot, right? For fear of doing something catastrophic. I think obviously he's trained himself to the point where now in continuity, or as of him becoming like a veteran hero, I'm sure it's become easier, right? It just becomes tendency. But one of the things that actually makes me appreciate Superman, and it's part of, I think, what makes him such an idealism of humanity, is that he is consciously restraining himself physically, verbally, mentally, right? Like, he doesn't even let himself think negatively about anything or anyone to a degree where he would even consider kind of mitigating his own sense of self-restraint, right? Like, it's to that degree. You know what I mean? And I think that's part of what makes him special. And I think it's kind of apparent in many of the representations of a younger Superman struggling to cope and hone in his power set, right? His abilities, his senses. I think the fact that his senses of the world are so overwhelming, but he's conditioned himself to be able to reel it in, is one of the things that makes him great, right? Because it wasn't easy. The thing that people look at Superman and start to kind of demean him for is because he's overpowered and because everything is too easy. But I think it's almost harder for Superman to show that level of restraint and control when he's constantly on like a stimulation overload from the world, right? It would be easier for him to snap somebody's neck with the flick of a finger than it would for him to, hug somebody, right? Without it. So to me, it's that restraint, that effort that he puts into it that makes him good. And it also kind of leans into and I'm not religious at all, but it leans into this sort of religious understanding that part of what makes acts of good so valuable is that there's a constant temptation to do wrong, right? That for example, if I have something and I know Joey wants that same thing, and I know it means more to Joey, even though I still want it, and I were to give it to Joey, I feel like it means more that I've done that act of kindness than if Joey wanted something that I had and that I didn't care about. It's not saying me giving it to him isn't a great thing, but that ability to overwrite kind of the temptation and that kind of human selfish tendency to keep what is mine, I think makes the act better. And Superman, to me, experiences that every second of the day, on such macro levels, right? Because of his overwhelming senses. And like I said, I don't disagree with the fact that I think it's definitely become easier over the years after he's, honed in his skills, for sure. But nonetheless, I still think it shows a ridiculous amount of care and a ridiculous amount of meditation on behalf of Superman.
Yeah, definitely. And, and when you mention things like Superman having to, learn how to use his powers and stuff like that, this is one of the reasons that, I really came to love the show Smallville, for example, because it was over the course of that show that whenever he got a new power, it came, over time and stuff like that. And he had to learn how to use each and every single ability that he had so that, so that he didn't burn somebody's face off or, blow somebody across the room, right? He had to exercise all of those muscles to be able to, get that level of control. And then, of course, how, the focus that it took to also maintain that control, because you got to think too, I know in a few years, or in a little bit, I'll be kind of going through it too with my daughter, for example, we're going to be potty training her and stuff like that, and even if, you know, even if you have full bladder control, that, you know, that doesn't mean that you can't lose control at any given point, you know? So you got to think too with Superman, just because he has that level of control, what happens if he stops paying attention for a fraction of a second? What happens if somebody, you know, just, if, you know, if a villain manages to get underneath his skin and just get his adrenaline to spike just a little bit higher, the amount of devastation that he could cause is really, I mean, it's, you know, it's incomparable to just about anything else. I mean, he could theoretically destroy the entire planet if he ever truly lost the control.
I mean, or he could become a tyrant, right? I mean, we've seen those. We've seen those doomsday scenarios in Injustice, and you even begin to see it in aspects of Kingdom Come, right? Even though Superman and the Justice League are kind of displayed as these really godly figures in something like Kingdom Come, it is very clear that, you know, the 10 plus years that Superman spends on that recreated farm in Kansas, is that, you know, he's mulling in the depression. He's mulling in the sort of disappointment that humanity chose a violent hero over, you know, himself. And that's why when he comes back, he does begin to exhibit these sort of dictatorial, you know, kind of habits, right? And he eventually, you know, I don't remember if it was the Congress or whatever, you know, towards the climax of the book when he was about to bring, you know, the entire ceiling down on Congress. It shows that there's a very fine line between, you know, being the Superman we know him to be and to being something kind of terrible, right? And it, you know, ultimately wasn't, you know, was aspects of humanity that were able to reel him back in. But to me, you know, that temptation is always there. And the thing that makes him special is how easily most of the time it is for him to shut down temptation. Because if Superman weren't tempted at all, I don't think he'd be interesting at all, to be honest with you. Like it brings up these really, really direct, like, Judeo-Christian references, you know what I mean? Like Jesus, for example, if you were to read something like Paradise Regained, you know, when John Milton pens his sort of his iteration of Jesus being tempted, you know, by the devil, it's seamless. Like Jesus doesn't question it because he is essentially perfect, right? He is God on earth. And to me, I don't think that makes him an interesting character. It doesn't make him something that I would want to follow. And part of what makes Superman a little bit more down to earth is that all of these temptations, the stimulus, the, you know, the potential to all of the potentials out there to cut through that self-restraint is what makes everything so difficult. You know, if it were easy for Superman to be Superman, then I feel like it would take all of the intrigue out of the character. It would take away any kind of potential for us as readers to connect with that character, right? Because although he is essentially a god incarnate, what makes him relatable are those very, very human parts of him, both the idealism, but also the difficulties that come with being human.
Yes, absolutely true. I do agree. You know, because I mean, Superman in himself, I mean, you know, he's more, you know, than just the physical strength, right?
Yeah.
You know, he's like you said, he's the ideals, you know, the embodiment of what humanity strives to be. You know, he's hope. You know, and, you know, of course, later on, you know, that's what is the symbol has just got reworked to the Kryptonian symbol of hope. You know, and it's just very interesting, you know, because you read stories like All-Star Superman, right? And he is just, I mean, this is easily one of the best Superman stories ever written, because, you know, you see Superman just doing so many things in this story. You know, he's helping people and pretty much, like, I'm trying to think of the words to say, you know, I'm not good with words, but, like, you know, it's a very interesting story because it's both, you know, there's a sadness to it, but, you know, there's also this hope that lingers throughout the entire series. Because even though, you know, Superman is dying and we know he's gonna die, you know, it's just what he does in those last, you know, over the course of that time frame until we get to that, you know, inevitable conclusion is just so fascinating, you know, in that even towards the end, even gets people like Lex Luthor to change, to see the world from his perspective, you know. And when people talk about Superman, I feel like moments like these don't come up, you know, like the scene where he's even stopping the girl from jumping off the roof and stuff like that. You know, when he wraps her up and tells her it's gonna be okay. You know, it's those kinds of things that, you know, make me even question how people view Superman when they say he's just a guy that punches things. And even again, you know, reinforcing what I had said earlier about certain Superman archetypes outside of the realm of that, you know, what was it? Even recently rewatching the movie Sky High, you know, you have the main character in that movie who's like seeing all these different characters in his high school that have all these different abilities and stuff like that. And he's saying those are cool. All I can do is punch stuff. Is a, you know, as of almost that's, you know, again, taking the Superman archetype and reinforcing that he's just his powers.
Yeah. I mean, and that's unfortunately how a lot of people look at Superman. They look at Superman strictly for his powers and not really kind of all of these elemental things that he represents, right? I mean, he's a symbol and an icon beyond being something so immensely powerful.
Yep. That's very true. Sorry. We got balls all over. We got balls all over the place.
That comes with being dad.
Yep, definitely. You know, and then so like to get into other things, you know, about Superman and stuff like that. You know, a lot of times, again, but because people relate his powers so much to the character, you know, they like to, you know, I oftentimes hear around take away Superman's powers, you know, he's nothing, or something, you know, or something to that effect, you know. But there have been so many times, right? So many different occasions where Superman has met other, you know, beings and stuff that either are on or have exceeded his own power level and really do lay the hurt on him, you know. And you really start to think, you know, if Superman really is this big, huge, overpowered god as well, that, you know, everything would just be too easy for him, you know. And I think stories like Infinite Crisis, for example, his fight with Superboy Prime, I mean, he got bloody at the end of that one. And it's because Superboy Prime was, he's a monster. Like, I know we talked a little bit about that prior to the stream and stuff like that. And, you know, and you just think about all these different situations where, you know, Superman has been in these types of situations and against these more powerful characters and stuff like that. And I'm like, every time somebody says that Superman is just so overpowered and it's just like, oh, he could just beat anyone because he's Superman. And I'm like, have you read any of these other stories?
Yeah, the thing is that it's easy for Superman to beat people up. It's harder for Superman to take a step back and to, you know, try to rehabilitate them in some way, right? Like Superman, where Batman is a little bit more willing to throw the crazies in Arkham and let them hash their things out. The thing that makes Superman special is his utmost desire to change people, right? I think that no matter how long his war, you know, with Lex Luthor goes on, not a day goes by that Clark Kent does not want to reform Lex, right? And help him be a better person, and to, you know, put Lex in a situation where he can use his resources to help people and not himself. So, you know, people fail to see that. You know, it's easy for Superman to fight. It's easy for Superman to let loose, you know, destroy planets, destroy universes even. And I mean, you see that in All-Star Superman, you know, the aforementioned story. And, you know, he's, you know, his arm wrestling match with Hercules, and I forget the other new god, but it's pretty astounding, that he has that level of restraint, because, there's that one panel where he shows what he could have done. He literally could have thrown him through a mountain. And that level of restraint is very present, right? Like, you can see that all Superman wants to do is throw him through the mountain, right? Because he's challenging him for the heart of Lois Lane, right? Like, the love of his life. And you can tell, it's obvious that Superman is getting annoyed, and he's feeling these very human emotions that might tempt a normal man to do wrong by that person, right? And yet Superman keeps on keeping on, right? He lets his morals guide him. He lets his ethics guide him. And that's why Superman spends his last days doing nothing but good. Like, it'd be easy for Superman to indulge himself, spend all of his time with Lois, right? Build that relationship. Maybe, spend the rest of his time with his parents. Or, well, his father was dead at the time, but you know what I mean? Like, he could do all of these things that were self-serving and nobody would blame him. And yet he accomplishes these 12, Olympian tasks, greater than anything that anybody has ever done, for everybody except for himself. And that's what makes him special. He feels the temptation to be human, but he has trained himself, right, to a degree where maybe it's become easier over time to not respond to those temptations. But what makes him special is that no matter how pure Superman is, he is still fighting the good fight, whether or not you can see it on his face. You know what I mean? That's iconicism. That's what makes Superman the symbol that he is. And that's something that I think a lot of people don't acknowledge. It's really unfortunate, but he's an incredible character. And like I said, the older I get, the more I love Superman, the more I appreciate what it represents, and the more that I think it teaches me personally how to be better. Right. So, I think that this conversation is just a really important one to have. For sure. I think it's, if one person who didn't think highly of Superman, who might be that person in online fan circles, who are only referring to Superman by his power level, I hope that they listen to this conversation and they think, you know what, maybe Superman is more than a guy with a really hard left hook.
Yes. Yeah. And that was excellently put. I actually don't think I could have said it better myself. But yeah, like, like I said, it's just so interesting. It's very, very interesting. Superman is such an amazing character. And like, like you said, it's like, he is, even though he comes from an alien planet and he has the power to rule us or destroy us as he sees fit, that he is a character. He is a character, still chooses, to adopt, the ideologies that he does, and decides to become our protector, and to, essentially try to show us, humanity a better path, so that, we don't, in some stories end up repeating the mistakes of, like, say, Krypton, for example, as, in some stories they were the engines of their own destruction. And
I was gonna say, and I love, like, how you brought it up there in two ways. One, the word adopted, and two, when you kind of discuss Krypton. The big way to frame this is that we didn't adopt Superman. Superman adopted us. Superman very well could have responded to humanity like Zod does, right? With disgust. He looks at us as a bunch of monkeys, throwing our own shit at each other, which is likely true, right? But he despises us for it, and is willing to slaughter us like animals, and to treat us as such. And Superman has the capacity to want to put us in a situation where we can better ourselves, and that's what's important, right? And that's why I know Jace had left, but that's why I don't like to look at Superman as this perfect figure, who doesn't have to make hard decisions, because you look at characters like Zod, who are of the same race, of the same culture, and yet yet when put in the exact same situation, would make the exact opposite choice that Superman would. And what makes Clark special is that his ability to delineate, right, between what the situation is and how to respond to it in the best manner possible. And when he does that with complete and utter reverence towards the people of Earth rather than what he might want to do, you know, kind of instinctually or animalistically, you know, that's what makes his character so endearing. And, you know, again, like I said, over time, I'm sure it became more of an instinct because it just became an ingrained part of who he is, right? Like for me, I'm a very aggressive person. I'm very combative. So it's really easy for me to see something that somebody might post online or for somebody to say something that I might regard as unnecessary or, you know, just to put it in blatant terms, stupid. And my first instinct is to go at it, right? And to be like, what is wrong with you? And probably a number of other words that are totally unpleasant for me to say on this podcast. But, you know, then you have someone like you. You're super easygoing. If somebody were to, you know, do that same thing, you just let it brush off your shoulder. And the fact of the matter is that, you know, we're both human beings. We're both people. Of course, we have our own separate backgrounds, but we're obviously going to respond to things differently. We're going to process it, and we're going to act on however, you know, we kind of deem this situation to be in terms of importance. And the fact that Superman has conditioned himself to always be the bigger person is pretty spectacular, right? Like that's something that I, as a human being, am still actively trying to teach myself to be like, right? Like I want to be able to let those things brush off my shoulder, but it's not easy, right? And the cool thing is that I'm sure that when Superman was young, like, you know, Ed Brewer was talking about how difficult it might have been for Superman to gauge himself. I'm sure it was also difficult for him to gauge himself emotionally when responding to things, not just kind of physically in how he exerts himself, but how he acts on his emotions. The thing about Superman is that he is developed into the man that we know him to be now in modern comics, right? He is training himself sounds a little bit less. I don't love the connotation around, but he's like conditioned himself. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's just the person he's become, and you know, it's a pretty magnificent thing. And again, in today's society, both on a kind of a social landscape and in you know, a fictional landscape, I think we need more of that. You know, it's not as present as it used to be.
Oh yeah, definitely agree. You know, I mean, when you really, you know, like you said, it's look at the landscape of today. You know, what better time than to have a character like Superman? You know?
Yeah.
It's just because like today, it's like, you know, everybody's just so combative. You know, you get online, especially social media, you talk about, you know, Superman maybe looking at us like monkey slinging shit at each other. That's what social media is essentially today. That's the modern day of us just throwing crap at each other. And, you know, when you have a character like Superman who would, you know, maybe come down and try to show us a better way, you know, how to break down those barriers that we kind of put up from our, you know, for ourselves, and, you know, open up and start that dialogue. Because like even though I didn't really care for the movie Batman v Superman, for example, the scene where Superman still goes, you know, to talk in front of, you know, the Senate panel and stuff like that was still very, very interesting, because even with all of the misunderstanding, all of the slinging and stuff that the media had thrown at him, he was still willing to sit down and have that dialogue.
Yeah, I mean, and you bring up Twitter. The thing about Superman is, you know, someone like you or I or the normal person, you know, we see somebody say something repulsive on the internet and we get mad, right? And we get frustrated, and we're not really able to act on it. Superman, you know, if he saw somebody say something stupid on Twitter, he'd probably use a number of his senses to detect who it was, go over there, and he could squash them like a freaking grape, but he doesn't, right?
Yeah, exactly. He wouldn't
he,
is the most
he,
important thing.
he has the power and the capability to act on any sort of stimulus, that meets his brain, and he doesn't. And in kind of a sense of role reversal compared to like what a normal person might do, he would not only not act aggressively, he would de-escalate the situation in the best way he possibly could. And something that I think is pretty important that Ed Brewer brought up in the live chat is he asks, how important was Jonathan and Martha Kent to giving us Superman? They were like all of the important, like they are the reason why Superman is the way he is. The fact of the matter that this they weren't broke, but they were definitely I would
And
say middle to lower class Americans out in the bumfuck nowhere of Smallville, who really had no incentive at all to raise this child who came crashing down from a foreign planet, but they did, and they took them in as their own. And you see stories like Superman for All Seasons and a number of other like origin stories where you see them struggling, right, with these really kind of moral questions on how they should raise Clark. And that's kind of what makes them special. The fact that they're asking themselves those questions, and the fact that they're afraid of, not raising him to be the best person he can be. And I think, to me, it goes beyond him being this unstoppable force. They just want him to be a good person, you know? And that's what's important. When good is done without an incentive, it's powerful, right? There's nothing again, trying to make you do good by any other standard than you wanting to do good. And that struggle that Jonathan and Martha Kent are kind of constantly emotionally weathering when they're raising Clark is kind of tremendous, right? Like I'm sure that like you're undergoing it too as a dad, and everybody who might have kids that are watching this can relate to that 100%. And it's those morals that they set within Clark, right? They could have done anything, right? Like they probably had more of an incentive as lower to middle class Americans to use Clark's abilities to better their own situation. And they didn't. They were humble farm people that just taught Superman to do good by everybody, right? Indiscriminately. And that's what makes them so special, right? And I say this all the time, is that Superman is more Clark Kent than he will ever be Kal-El. And that's 100% because of how he was raised, right? The fact that two human beings taught this alien with unstoppable and unfathomable powers to be the most human of us all is incredible.
Yes. And I think that's very important, for his character to just really look, at Jonathan and Martha's love, because we've seen in other scenarios, whether it was the comics or shows and stuff like that, where Superman was raised by people that weren't the Kents, and just what the difference in a character like that is. I know in an episode of Smallville, Clark ended up in an alternate reality where he was raised by Lionel Luthor, right? And who did he become? He became Ultraman, like, the eventually the head of the crime syndicate and stuff like that, in that particular universe. And, it really does make you like really, ask those, important questions, like, of course, nature versus nurture, because he undoubtedly, I'm sure at certain points, felt his Kryptonian heritage coming out, especially as he got older, and he had to kind of find ways to deal with that, whether it was being counseled through, his parents and stuff like that. Because at any one point, at any point, really, even during his adolescent era stage, where he's supposed to be like super rebellious and stuff, like you had said earlier in the video, if he wanted to, he could have just flicked his parents through a wall. but he didn't, you know? And
I mean,
huh?
it's to me, I've always seen it as Superman extending the love that he has for his parents to the rest of humankind. And it's certainly something that I think leads humanity by an example. You know, it's honestly the more we talk about Superman, the more I kind of intellectualize my respect and my love for this character, because and obviously the conversation of the parental guidance and the nurture of the Kents, it's really astounding, man. It's and it goes to show you, and I know this is a little bit more philosophical than it is comic book and story, but you look at people and you look at who they are, and it's ultimately a huge reflection of where they come from, and how they're going to respond to those things. Like, I know Ed Brewer just says it's just they were good parents in Brightburn too, but I mean, you could just argue that they wanted to create a horror movie with Superman, so they put that scenario out there. I mean, sure, there are very fine lines, in that situation, but the thing that makes the Kents, I think, so special in how they raised Clark was kind of their unyielding love for him, right? Like, one of the things that made the kid in Brightburn go crazy was that he could tell that his parents were afraid of him, right? Like, that was evident, pretty much from the moment his powers started to materialize. And so, whereas the Kents, they looked at that power, I'm sure they were startled, but they think, we'll put him in a position where he can decide what he wants to do with them, because ultimately they are his gifts. And regardless of that, they raised him to the best of their ability, to the most kind of normal standard they possibly could, until his powers became an unavoidable thing that they had to look dead in the eye and figure out what the best possible move was to make next.
Yeah, and I think it's important too to also, like, when the Brightburn example comes up too, and it's just more, I think, also, like, not just that he could see that they were afraid of him, like, like, again, when you juxtapose it to, say, Clark Kent / Superman's upbringing, that when his powers started to materialize, right, the Kents addressed it. The Kents said, okay, we found ourselves in a very interesting situation. Now we got to figure out the best way to deal with it. And the best way to deal with it is to really teach him how to be a good person. In Brightburn, when you got those parents and stuff, the mother just flat out wanted to ignore the issue and chose not to address it. The dad became very confrontational. And, and then, of course, towards the climax of the film, both parents tried to kill him. And it's really interesting. And, and also, like, with that movie too, I definitely always felt like I always wanted to review that movie, but I just never found the time to do it. Where, there was definitely something about that movie where I feel like, the ideas and exploration of his journey to becoming a villain always could have been done a little bit better. Just in terms of, like, seeing that transformation, because in the movie, he does say that he was always trying to do good, but we never really saw elements of that within the film. I always wonder if they got left on the cutting room floor, but when I look at that Superman archetype like that, because that's what he is, he's still, once again, that Superman archetype where they wanted to make a horror movie. And yeah, it's just like, when you again look at those parents versus the Kents, just the stark contrast and how they decided to deal with their child's upbringing as soon as the powers materialized was completely opposite, And I think you could argue that if the Kents were the one to raise that kid from Brightburn, he may have turned into that universe's Superman.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a possibility. To me, there's also a part of it too where I feel like, and I think it's pretty evident that, like, the kid was influenced by some crazy space magic mumbo jumbo. You know what I mean? Like, when he approaches his ship or whatever, you know what I mean? He's practically hypnotized, right? And he becomes infinitely more hostile than he was before. Before, he was just, a kid kind of trying to come to grips with this sudden onset of unimaginable power. And then after that is where, you know, it becomes this very animalistic, predatory desire for him to do things to people. So I think that's probably a big part of it. Like they set up an actual like supernatural prompt for him to become, you know, this really virulent and malignant thing. But certainly, yes, I do also think that if raised by the Kents, I'm sure that would be counteracted, because not only did the Kents raise him and teach him verbally, they practiced what they preached, right? You see all of those kids, you know, they see, you know, dad says, don't smoke cigarettes. What happens when dad smokes cigarettes their whole childhood? There's a good chance the kid might pick up a cigarette the minute they get the chance. What makes the Kents so different is that they embodied the lessons that they were trying to teach Clark. Not only were they actively teaching it to him, they were living by it. And that, you know, is very much on the most base level an example of monkey see, monkey do. Like Clark saw that they were living by the things that they were trying to teach him. And to him, he internalized that as, well, he internalized that as, I think, the only possible behavior, you know, for him to exhibit. And that's why Superman is so great. You're right, because of the
Yeah, absolutely. And then we got Boom here in the chats as well, who says that Superman is an interesting character from a nature versus nurture perspective. He is innately good, regardless of the Kents, or are the Kents crucial ingredient to who Superman is. And you know, and I think that's, you know, one of the things we're talking about is that, you know, Superman really is, or as like, sorry, the Kents, you know, we really do feel like we're crucial to the development of Superman. I mean, yeah, if we go back to the early, you know, Siegel and Schuster stories, I believe he was actually just raised in an orphanage during that time. Mm-hmm. I know they had said that in the Fleischer cartoons as well, that he was raised in an orphanage. You know, and of course, you know, that's probably a different conversation, you know, that we could probably dig into in terms of nature versus nurture. But, you know, definitely in later, more modern stories and stuff like that, where the Kents became a real center for Clark Kent to develop those, you know, his ideals and stuff and his humanity off of. Like you said, it's like they were essentially, like, at the time, you know, because Clark Kent growing up, what, you know, kids are often compared to, you know, putty or clay. You know, they gotta be sculpted, right? You know, and the Kents were that mold, that, you know, that mold that slowly shaped Clark into who he is. And you know, I feel like if you were going to retell Superman, you know, from a different perspective, and you remove the Kents from it this time around, I think, you know, the result would probably be different.
Well, I mean, it all comes down to like John Locke's blank slate theory, right? Tabula rasa. And that, you know, when we're born, our minds are completely blank. We don't know how to process information or data. And through experiencing the world through our various senses, we develop that sort of mechanism by which we will then judge the world or judge the stimulus moving forward. And I think that's very much the case. And regarding, you know, that maybe whatever the golden age origin for him might be, to be fair, I don't put a lot of stock in golden age comics. I'm sorry. I might be a heretic for saying that. But I think our understanding of what makes characters interesting and complex and organic has evolved, God, 100-fold since then. So, you know, where I 100% love and respect Golden Age comics for giving us these characters, really, these characters didn't come into their own and how we know them to be, and how I would say we've grown to love them until way later on, right? When these other more organic dynamics have been introduced. They became more than just, you know, bright colors flying across a page or a screen. You know, they became aspects of people, humanity, whether or not it's our strengths, weaknesses, our insecurities, whatever. And that's what makes them, I think, far more endearing. And I think that's why people have developed so much more of an intimate connection with those characters. So, that's just a long way of me probably pissing off a great number of older comic book fans. But honestly, these characters have existed for 80 years, and will probably continue to outlive everybody that is both watching and participating in this conversation here. So they'll continue to develop, and humanity will continue to find ways to make these characters so endearing. So, if that is the case, and that the original origin for Superman had him in an orphanage, boy, was introducing the Kents one of the best ideas that anybody in comics have ever had.
Yeah, absolutely true. Absolutely true. And because I mean, again, it's one of those aspects and elements that just makes the story so much better. Because it's but I mean, just having him in an orphanage, being raised in the system, and then him just becoming Superman anyway. Yeah, I can understand people pointing to that and saying, maybe he's not so relatable. But, with the evolution of storytelling, especially in the comic book space, it's become more important than ever to really, look at characters like Superman. And when they decided, of course, to, reformat them with the Kents and stuff like that, again, that was an excellent choice, and I hope nobody ever walks back on that, in the future.
Bendis, I'm looking at you.
Give him time. I'm sure he's on the way before he's off the book.
So I'm curious, because I know we're kind of saddling on an hour here, and obviously the big topic of conversation is, do people understand Superman? Joey, if somebody's watching this and you wanted them to take away one thing about Superman that they might not have come into this conversation with, what would that be?
Ooh, that's a good question. Like, I mean, if you come in thinking, again, that Superman is just nothing but powers, right? I think it's just more, I would want them to take away, again, just, this is a hard question, because there's really so many answers to this, but just the idea of, again, of the internal struggle that he has to face on a daily basis with dealing with his powers, not losing control and stuff like that, and just trying to be the best person that he can be in a world that's essentially crumbling around him. I would say definitely look at Superman, from the more, from what's underneath the layers instead of the surface. You gotta always look at what's underneath the surface to really get the true meaning of Superman, which again is those hope, the ideals, the struggle that he has to face. So how about you? Same question?
Yeah, I mean, and I'll preface this by mentioning the live comment here from Ed Brewer. He says the fans seem to know Superman pretty well. I don't know if it was sarcastic or not, but I think the fact that we're having this conversation was a testament to how much I don't think fans really do know Superman. The fact that fans do look at Superman on this superficial level, and they see the man in the bright red, blue, and yellow tights, when they say he's unrelatable, they say, he's just this unstoppable force, and he's so much more than that. He's humanity, he's restraint, he's all the things that we should be, and all the things that he has the power not to be but chooses to. He's a symbol, and he is, I think, a figure that has permeated the hearts and minds of people all over the world in a way that not even religious figures will do. I think that that symbol, that the big crest of the House of L that is carried by Superman has permeated the world in ways nothing else has. You look at somebody, you see that symbol, and you think they're good. They're good. They're good people. They're good. And I think that's what's so endearing. He's more than a pair of really heavy hands. He's more than heat vision. He's more than ice breath. He's more than the ability to travel across the world in a matter of seconds. You know, he's something that we should aspire to be, you know?
Yeah.
And I think if anybody, you know, comes out of this conversation, that's what I want them to take away, you know, is that if you're defining Superman, the most super thing about him is how he chooses to, I would say, how he chooses to be the man more than he does to be super. You know, super is what comes after. The super is what enables him to be the best person he can possibly be. And if anybody takes anything out of this conversation, I'd want it to be that.
Fantastic. And as we start to wrap things up here, since the main topic of discussion is pretty much finished, if you could, for everybody watching or listening and stuff like that, if you could give one Superman reading recommendation that, in your opinion, perfectly illustrates any of the points we made here today, what would it be?
Superman for all seasons, 100%. I think it represents a lot of the things that we talked about today. It represents his capacity to restrain himself. It represents his fundamental kinship and love of humanity and of life. I think it represents, I mean, it very clearly articulates what made the Kents so special as parents and how much they cared, you know, about raising this foreign, you know, species, this foreign child as their own and loving him as such. It's a great story, man, and it says a lot about his mythos, both obviously regarding Superman as a character, but also his kind of secondary cast of characters, and you get to see a lot of what makes him special through their eyes, and I think that is a big part of what makes that book so endearing. I mean, it's also, you know, I tend to be the type that looks for a lot of like crazy intense nuance and layers, and this story is very well layered, but it delivers it in a very simple package, right? It is very well layered and very deliberate, but it distills this all into something that I think, whether or not you can sit there and, you know, record a whole video essay on it, you will walk out of this understanding what makes Superman so special. And to me, that is fundamentally one of the biggest or greatest testaments to a story, right? Is that it's able to appeal to people on many different levels. And Superman for all seasons 100% does that.
Hey, that's really, really, really awesome. And for me, I mean, there's so many that I could recommend. I mean, if you are someone who hasn't checked it out, you know, I'm sure there's many that have, but I have actually come across quite a few people that have not actually ever read All-Star Superman. That book too, I think is a great piece on, you know, just Superman, about, you know, like him as a person, you know, and just not just him throwing punches and stuff like that, but just showing what's essentially, yeah, like I said, what's underneath, you know, the more human aspects of his character and stuff like that, and what he chooses to do, you know, with the last little bit of time that he has left on Earth. And really, even though it's such a sad story, it's still full of hope and optimism and stuff like that. So that would definitely be my my recommendation for sure, would be All-Star Superman.
That's a great one, man. Can't go wrong with it.
All right. And with that, I think we've reached the end of this stream. Thank you, everybody that had joined us in the chats. I know we've seen Comic Boom, Eric Breen, Ed Brewer. Who else we got here? Jason Milam. Yep, that looks so. And the Geek Fortress. Can't forget the good old Geek Fortress. So I think we had a very good conversation. I had loads of fun, sir. Again, for if you are unfamiliar with Dark Knight Nation, coming across this later, I left a link to his channel in the description down below. Definitely check him out. He does fantastic analyses on comic books. and really picks apart. You know, I think we started calling you what the surgeon of comic book reviews, just because of how intricate you get down into it. So definitely give him a check. And if there's anything else you want to say, sir, you have the floor.
Well, man, first of all, thank you for the praise and thank you for inviting me on to have this discussion. And, I appreciate everybody in the chat giving their thoughts, of course. Yeah, man, I enjoy this conversation, and these are kind of the types of conversations that I like to have. So if anybody ends up wanting to mosey on over, you can expect live conversations of this nature every week, along with that kind of surgical comic book review, as Joe had mentioned. But also make sure you subscribe to this guy down below, of course. And yeah, I just want to thank Joey for having me on. I want to thank everybody for watching and participating with their thoughts. And it's a good time as always.
Yeah, thanks a lot, sir. And like you said, if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe down below. Please like this video, ring that notification bell so you never miss any future videos. And with that, take care, have a great day, and as always, stay geeky.